I'm Deborah Jan Gray, and I have written, produced, and performed an autobiographical 17-episode podcast called Authentically Debs, A Southern Girl Looks at 71. It's now up on all the podcast platforms. It's quite simply the story of my life. My life has been interesting, dangerous, joyful, full of excitement, some depression, highs and lows, but it never was boring. And I've lived to tell about it. I'm also a SAG-AFTRA actor. The through line of my podcast is my suffering with OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, from birth. That alone was responsible for many crazy, some bad decisions I've made during my life. But it makes for a very interesting and intriguing life story and episodic podcast. I told the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, the good, the bad, and the ugly. OCD is serious and is one of the top 3 mental illnesses in the world, along with schizophrenia and bipolar, but those two get much more press than OCD, and I hope that changes. Although that's the through line until I was finally diagnosed in my early 50s and I began treatment, it's not my whole life. I don't consider myself defined by OCD, although it has plagued me my entire life, especially until I got treatment. I was raised by racists in the Jim Crow South. My parents divorced when I was a baby, and I lived until age 10 with my mother and my maternal grandmother. My father was a career Air Force pilot, fighter jets in both World War II and Korea. My parents married late, and I was their only child. I was born in Louisiana and lived there until I was 10, when my mother, who was definitely a party girl but finally got her degree, moved to a little town in an adjacent state, Arkansas, and was a teacher. That was the 4 happiest years of my life, and we're talking about 4th through 7th grade, which is kind of sad in a way. But anyway, the little town that we moved to was Stamps, Arkansas, and that is where Maya Angelou also hails. And it's very close to Hope, an even smaller town, which was Bill Clinton's birthplace. And from there, my mother and I moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, where she also taught. And I attended junior high and graduated high school there, married, earned my college degree, and had 2 daughters and divorced. I also opened my own business in Little Rock. It was called The Breakfast Room. It was a gourmet store, and I began writing and performing my own radio and TV commercials for it. I was also writing and singing commercial jingles for the store. Then I moved to Dallas, Texas with the idea of opening another store, but by then I was so involved with writing and singing original music, most of which was country, that I never opened the second store, and shortly moved to Los Angeles with a rock band as their chick singer. I remained there less than a year, and then I left with another band, also as a chick singer, and we toured upstate New York in the winter. Our last gig was in Manhattan in New York City, and I alone from the rest of the group decided to remain there and experience New York because I never had. I taught special education, because that was my degree during the day, in the South Bronx in a special kindergarten class, and then I played original country songs at night in the West Village clubs, the largest of which was the Lone Star Cafe. I'm leaving out all the juicy parts of my life in this synopsis in lieu of a treatment in this pitch. But suffice to say that I was burned by a person in the music business in Manhattan, and I was fed up with 3 years of living there. So I did consult my astrologist and left shortly for Paris, France. alone, convinced that I could survive there as a country singer. When I realized quite quickly that turned out not to be the case, I did find some friends to live with, students from the Sorbonne, and for a few months I was there until I ran out of money, and then I went back to New York. Let's see, I remained there only shortly before meeting a man through an escort service where I worked as a call girl for the Mayflower Madam, which you may remember, and he took me to San Francisco, where I lived for 10 years, only 3 with him, before returning to the Deep South briefly to spend time with my children and my elderly relatives in Arkansas and Louisiana, respectively, before returning to California to stay in '91, and this time to Los Angeles, and I'm here now. So during my life, I've been hospitalized with OCD, although no doctor ever diagnosed it correctly until later when I did, and found a shrink to confirm the diagnosis. I had 3 abortions. I worked as an escort. I studied acting in New York and was trained and performed theater for 10 years in San Francisco. In Los Angeles, I became involved with online dating with this horrible man, and all of this that I'm telling you is in the podcast, who unknowingly to me ran a Ponzi scheme, and my association with him, in which I completely lost myself during those 5 years because he did not want me to take my medicine for OCD, resulted in my getting a felony, no prison time, in exchange for testifying against him, who served 11 years in federal prison for tax evasion. I returned to Los Angeles in '91 for the sole purpose of continuing my pursuit of acting, this time in film and TV, only to find that I had inherited a granddaughter to raise. It was something I chose, so my plans changed. I raised her, best thing I ever did, and I also taught at Juvie, Juvenile Hall, where my high school students were incarcerated. My 10 years of teaching those youth at risk, that was really the only time I ever liked teaching because it was truly the ER of education. It wasn't boring. So also now I've retired from teaching special ed after 25 years. I think it's about time. While I was doing that, I was assaulted by 2 of my teenage students at Juvie, one by a girl who stabbed me with a pencil in the temple, and the last by a boy who broke my laptop in half, then threw the heavy hard drive part of it at my face. I was out for months healing and then returned once COVID hit and everything became virtual. I didn't like that, so I decided to retire. I'll just close by saying that my family has been riddled by addiction and other forms of mental illness. My podcast is packed. I see it as a mini-series, which is why I'm pitching it to you today. And hopefully this intrigues you enough to take a listen to it. Again, it's Authentically Debs, and hopefully we can meet and discuss it and share our vision about it. In the meantime, I'm now starting my 2nd season of the podcast, which is interview format. I'm interviewing listeners, fellow sufferers of OCD. Some are authors who've written books about it, as well as other mental health professionals, fellow actors, agents, producers, coaches, directors, casting directors, and the family, on which some of which I'm still on speaking terms. I'm also an audiobook narrator, and I continue to study acting, auditioning as much as possible. Oh, and I'm bisexual. Finally, as an actor, I watch a lot of TV, network, premium channels, and streaming. There are a few outstanding shows, but there's also a lot of trash. My autobiographical podcast, Authentically Debs, is extraordinary, or I wouldn't have contacted you with this pitch. So let's get together and talk about it. And thank you for this time.